My name is Adrian Harewood, and I'm a journalist, host of the current affairs podcast called In Bed with the Elephant, and professor in the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. And I bring you very warm greetings from Ottawa, Canada, although it's quite cold in Ottawa today. It's only 3 degrees Celsius, but it's an honor for me to be serving as your moderator for this opening plenary session, The Problem of Knowledge Production, Decolonizing Methodologies. Now, if you came of age in the 1980s, as you can tell I'm a little old, like I did in the 1980s, it was one of the songs that defined the decade. Redemption Song is the last track on Uprising, the 12th album by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Do people here know Bob Marley? Fans of Bob Marley? Okay. It's now considered one of the most transformative songs of the 20th century, and perhaps of all time. It's become one of the great global anthems sung around the world, from Guinea to Malaysia to Vietnam to Grenada to Argentina, from Cuba to Martinique to Sudan to Ghana, from Brazil to Ireland to Spain to Algeria to Zimbabwe, from Iran to Mexico to Turkey to Palestine. Who could forget those arresting opening lines to the song written and sung by the Jamaican poet, philosopher, prophet, and bard Bob Marley? "O pirates, yes, they rob I. Sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom, 'cause all I ever had? Redemption songs, redemption songs." The song is about the struggles of Black people. But it's a song that extends to all peoples who've experienced oppression or subjugation. The line that really stands out, though, is this one: "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." Now, while that line may have been sung by Bob Marley and is a line for the ages, the most memorable line in Redemption Song, it wasn't written by Bob Marley. Bob Marley actually took that line from a famous speech delivered by another Jamaican icon, the Pan-African organizer and orator Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Garvey had uttered the words in an address he delivered in 1937 in Canada, in Sydney, Nova Scotia, on Canada's east coast, a place called Menelik Hall. Menelik Hall was a center for social activism for the Caribbean community in Sydney, Nova Scotia. It was named after Emperor Menelik II, the Ethiopian monarch who reigned from 1865 to 1931. And who had led Ethiopian forces in 1896 to a very famous victory over Italian colonial forces in the Battle of Adwa. Here is what Garvey actually said: "We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. Mind is your only ruler, sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave of the other man who uses his mind." Bob Marley's Redemption Song is a song about resilience and resistance. It's a song about renewal and rebirth. It's a song about liberation. Redemption Song is a decolonial manifesto. And it captures the essence and spirit of what our panel is going to be doing this morning. Because in this session, we are thinking about thinking. We're thinking about knowledge and considering how it has been produced, how dominant research methodologies continue to reinforce global hierarchies of knowledge. Indeed, we are engaging in a dialogue about the genealogy of knowledge. We're discussing how ways of knowing that have emanated from Western epistemological frameworks have been deemed to be universal and objective. We're trying to imagine a decolonized knowledge production process that is more representative of the world, that recognizes the value of a diverse range of stories and storytellers, philosophies and philosophers, ways of seeing and being. It's now my great pleasure to welcome and to introduce our panelists, each of whom will speak for 3 and 5 minutes, followed by a questions and answer period. Walter Di Mignolo is a distinguished emeritus professor of Romance Studies and a professor of literature at Duke University. His influential publications include The Politics of Decolonial Investigations. Anne Norton, to my right, is a distinguished professor of political science, emerita at the University of Pennsylvania. She's the author of, among other books, On the Muslim Question, and I actually use that book in my classes. Thank you. Saad Farid Al-Attas is professor of sociology and anthropology at the National University of Singapore. He's the author of the book Applying Ibn Khaldun, The Recovery of a Lost Tradition in Sociology. And Salman Said is a professor of decolonial thought and rhetoric at the University of Leeds. His major books include A Fundamental Fear, Eurocentrism, and the Emergence of Islamism. Please give them a warm welcome. So, Professor Mignolo, I thought we'd start with you. You can take the floor.
Oops, sorry.
Professor Mignolo, I thought we'd start with you if you have a couple of opening remarks to make.
But I don't understand very well what is the question you ask.
Well, the first question is I'll ask this question. You often describe modernity and colonization as interdependent. How should we understand the relationship between colonization and modernity?
And modernity.
And modernity.
How much time do I have?
You're gonna have 3 minutes.
Not enough.
I don't want to talk more than 5 minutes, but the question is complex. I would say that I would start from the vocabulary with that we use every day. Normally, let's say modernity and modernization. We say coloniality and colonization, and decoloniality and decolonization. So what are the relationship between those? The words that close in ity and the word that close in ion. So modernity is a vision, it's a project, it's a design. As a student of mine said, as a matter of fact, she was from Singapore, so she said in a paper, modernity is somebody who tells you, we will make you better, and you believe it. So that is a promise of salvation, a promise of civilization, a promise of progress, a promise of modernity and modernization, a promise of market democracy. What modernity hides is coloniality. And coloniality is the logic of domination, of expropriation, of exploitation, of diminishing and your languages, your knowledge, your belief. And as Frantz Fanon said many years ago, the colonizer is not satisfied with just taking your land and kind of destituting your government by a kind of perverse logic, and that is Fanon words. They get into your mind and kind of twist your memories and your kind of sense of being. So that is coloniality. And why decoloniality is on the horizon? It's a grammar. It's a grammar of liberation. And decolonization is the way that that grammar is activated in a different domain. Politics, economics, and here we're talking about knowledge. And the question is, there cannot be a universal design or universal program from decolonization. Decoloniality, we can agree globally that it's a project of liberation. But the way that liberation is worked in Africa, in different parts of Asia, in South America, in North America, in Russia, is different. So I don't know if this kind of outline explains the relationship between the words and what the word designates. And that is another story, right?
One other question, Professor Mignola, because in your work, you distinguish between de-Westernization and decolonialization. What is the difference between decolonization and de-Westernization?
Well, for me, that is a crucial distinction, and it's a lot of confusion in the critique of people, the critique decolonization because of the lack of distinction between de-Westernization and decolonization. What is de-Westernization? We more or less know. As a matter of fact, another person from Singapore, Kishore Mahbubani, who was ambassador of Singapore in the United Nations in the 90s, and then he came back to Singapore and found the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public School. He published, for me, a remarkable book, but for many other people too, in 2010, 2011, titled The Irreversible Shift of Global Power to the East. And one of the chapters is called De-Westernization. And for me, that was very illuminating. Basically, the distinction is that de-Westernization is a state-led project. An example, the alliance between Russia and China, the BRICS, the BRIC Plus, those are Brazil, South Africa, those are state-led projects. But the state-led project needs also a different kind of narrative. So the state-led project is not just kind of disputing the control of trade, the control of the kind of the technology, but also the need of a different kind of narrative. And to simplify matter, the narrative put forward by Xi Jinping that many people now are taking seriously,
the president of
win-win.
The president of China.
Yeah. Kind of, we don't want to kind of dominate. We can discuss that, but the narrative is win-win is I respect you and let's work together toward a kind of the common world of humanity, something like that. While the West is still into the narrative of the zero-sum game, is the kind of inventing enemy and trying to kind of destroy the enemy. So when the de-Westernization began to arise about 2008, 2010, 2011, we have and let's say that de-Westernization is a reformation, it engendered the counter-reformation, which is re-Westernization. And we began to see, since the presidents of Barack Obama to the president of Donald Trump, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, that the project the old project of Westernization has to be re-Westernized now because we have a powerful adversary. So Westernization goes together with re-Westernization, and the last point I want to make, what is decoloniality now, and what is decolonization now? Well, to simplify matter again, during the Cold War, decolonization meant let's send the settler home and build our own nation state. And that was achieved. Was achieved in Asia and Africa in the second half of the 20th century, in South America and in North America too, in Haiti, in the end of 18th and 19th century. But the question now is, there is no more settlers except in Israel. It's the only place that we can see that it's a kind of settler colonialism. But in the rest of the world, it's just coloniality operates without settler colonialism. And that, it's a long story of that, but again, to make a long story short, I mean, the control and domination of the United States is not settler colonization, but is military bases, is kind of financial, is control of the dollar, is control of the mass media, etc. Okay. So the question, I think, is fundamental for this forum is where is decolonization operative? And I think that I cannot go to the United Nations and say, hey guys, you know, I have a great idea. If we go with decolonization, we find solution for the world. I think that decolonization now operates at the level of the public sphere. And now, and there is education, but education not just in the classroom of the university, education in general. So that is a kind of the linking, another concept that I want to elaborate here, but kind of extricate ourselves of what modernity, as my student said, of what modernity wants us to be, to extricate ourselves from that project and believe our project. And last thing I want to say, decoloniality or demodernization, de-westernization are not projects against the West that many times is being said. Okay. There are projects for us, projects for the states that want to kind of liberate themselves from Washington, and ourselves that want to liberate from what modernity wants us to be. Right. So that is the sphere for me of decolonization operate. And this is an example.
Thank you. Professor Alatas, you've written this. The main question is whether our academic institutions have intellectual leadership of sufficient integrity, resolve, and bravery to combat imitative and culturally slavish ideals, or they are led by people who are content to be captive minds that barely motivated by the current structures of reward and punishment. I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about the problem of academic dependency and the captive mind.
Okay, thank you. There's several ways to discuss this, but let me put it this way. Decolonization of knowledge is really about being critical of the received ideas and terms, yeah? Mm-hmm. And I want to give maybe an example of that. We all know, and we use the term post-colonial, right? We say we are in a post-colonial world. And I think this is very problematic. Our human condition today is really neo-colonialism. We are, and this was said by Sukarno in 1955 at the Bandung Conference. He said that colonialism has not gone away. We are living in a and he referred to he used the term neo-colonialism.
And what does that mean? What does it mean to
basically it means colonialism without being politically controlled, without being politically ruled by the Europeans. But in terms of culture, militarily, political, intellectual, in all these dimensions, we are still very much controlled. Now, the way I understand it is that Eurocentric knowledge functions to promote neocolonialism. I'll just give you an example. For those of you who study economics, political science, even sociology, but especially in economics, because economics, I think, is the most colonial, most neo-colonial science in the social sciences and humanities. You will not be taught that there is an alternative to capitalism. There's no option beyond capitalism. That is assumed to be a fact. So we are not taught to imagine any system beyond capitalism. And this is, so this sort of helps to consolidate the dominant ideology. I think what has happened is over the years, the recognition of neocolonialism, both in education but also in the actual political economic structures of the world, has led to a pushback by scholars and activists, but even states. Professor Mignolo was referring to the BRICS countries, for example. Now, this pushback against neocolonialism has resulted in the re-emergence of pro-colonial thought. And I think we are possibly seeing this trend. Maybe I just take 30 seconds more.
Sure, no problem.
Because I want to give an example. In academia, you do have the re-emergence of pro-colonial thought among academics, particularly in the United States and in Britain, but also in the political sphere. And I want to give a very good example of that from recent events. Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, he gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference in February. This is before the US war against Iran. Now, in this speech, he was talking to Europeans. He actually lamented the good old days of colonialism. He was praising the European colonization of the Americas. He was speaking about how it was a great historical event, without at once mentioning that European colonization of the Americas was accompanied by genocide of Native Americans, etc., etc. And he was lamenting that we have lost those great days, and saying to the Europeans, we must revive Western Christian civilization. We must regain our domination over the world. Now here you have a very grotesque, ugly case being made for colonialism. And I think it is a reaction to the pushback against neocolonialism around the world, especially with regard to certain countries, Cuba, Iran, the BRICS countries, the attempt to de-dollarize the world economy and so on.
And he was saying it without apology. Like there was a brazenness about what he was saying.
No, yeah. So I think that what's happening nowadays is that there is a loss of the pretension to be civilized. Because now they are talking about destroying societies, taking the oil, taking the resources, and reviving the glory of Western civilization in the context of wanting to dominate other countries, other regions, other civilizations. So there's no pretense of being civilized. So to me, this is an expression of the uncivilization as far as their expression is concerned, the uncivilization of the West in terms of their understanding of Western civilization. Of course, within the West, you have people who have a genuine understanding of what it means to be civilized in the moral sense.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you another question, just a follow-up question, and to focus on academic dependency. Yeah. Because you write about the fact that there's a kind of an intellectual academic economy that's dominated by the North, that's dominated by the West. Yeah. And that institutions, academic institutions of the South, depend on the North for often publishing, or for grants, or for all sorts of things. How do we go about creating a new kind of world in which the institutions of the Global South are not as dependent on that intellectual economy dominated by the North? Is it possible to have a kind of an academic, a reversal of that dependency?
Academic knowledge and it's the coloniality of academic knowledge, the Eurocentricity of academic knowledge, is intimately related to the Eurocentricity or the neo-coloniality of the world. So the knowledge, dominant orientation in knowledge, especially in social sciences and humanities, tends to promote the Eurocentricity of the world. So when we talk about decolonizing knowledge, it's not just for the sake of decolonizing our minds, but for the sake of dismantling the structures of neocolonialism. For that, we need to think independently, right? But we don't think independently. We are academically dependent. Concepts, ideas, even research agenda are all dependent, mainly dependent on North American, British, to some extent French education. Now, the question you're referring to is, can we dismantle this? Mm-hmm. I think very difficult. At the individual level, as individual scholars, we can. We can be as independent-minded as we can. At the level of institutions, I feel it is very difficult. Why? Because our ministers of education, I'm talking about countries in the global south, our rectors, presidents of universities, are all committed to the global neoliberal system of education, right? We are so slavish to the idea of metrics. You have to publish. I think it's the same thing in Turkey, right? If you're a young academic, you have to publish in Scopus or Web of Science. We're obsessed with numbers. In my university, National University of Singapore, it's even worse. If you want to get a promotion, you should publish a book, which is okay. But the book must be published in a top university press. And there are only a handful of university presses. Oxford, in Britain, only Oxford and Cambridge. If you publish in Bristol University Press, no offense to anybody who might be from there, that doesn't really count. So Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, in the US, just a handful. Harvard, University of Berkeley Press, University of Chicago Press, Duke University Press also. But that's it. If you publish in your own university press, it doesn't count. So we really devalue ourselves, right? So, ultimately, apart from the intellectual problem, it's a matter of lack of shame. We don't have, the idea, this idea of having, being shameful, that we neglect, we demean, we don't assign any prestige to our own institutions like our university presses.
But you're saying our academic leaders need more dignity.
This is all. They
need more dignity.
They need to have the attitude of dignity. Yeah. And but I think we willingly, at the institutional level, we willingly resign ourselves to being merely followers.
Mm-hmm. Professor Norton, the question is, how do the definitions of universal canons shape which voices and perspectives on Muslim societies are included or excluded within political theory and the humanities at Western universities?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. The creation of a canon is always an enterprise of domination. And that enterprise has, as most colonialism does, a double face. That is to say, the colonization that happens in the global south is accompanied by the repression, disenfranchisement, often the expropriation of land and of learning from people at home, from the indigenous in settler colonies like mine.
Theft. It's theft, you're saying. There's theft. There's theft going on.
Oh, it's deeper than disrespect. It's a kind of radical dehumanization. And that exclusion from the canon is very thorough and very enduring. And it has been resisted all the way along. And I think it's quite important that we recognize that resistance is not a novelty. There is a legacy of resistance that we all have and that we should seize and that we can rely on to give ourselves a kind of intellectual nurture. People have been trying for years, decades, to decolonize the canon, to push the canon to admit Black voices, women's voices, voices from the global South, and now, more recently, in the United States, indigenous voices. And each of those moments is accompanied by pro-colonial voices who say, oh, no, 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 not meeting the standard. But it's also accompanied by a kind of intellectual ferment, that people encounter ideas they haven't seen before. And those ideas help them to contest some of the fundamental structures of colonialism. Because, like my colleague, colonialism is not over. It's not over, it's not defeated. We live in a world colonialism built, and that world is one in which many of us, both in the global South, but also in the global North, are excluded from. So that fight is one that recurs over and over again, and although one feels at the time that there's pushback, but there is progress, there is ferment, and there are always people who are surprised by the ideas they encounter from people like C.L.R. James or...
The Trinidadian intellectual.
Yes, exactly. Or Glenn Coldhart in Canada. Or, Fanon, Aimé Césaire. The whole body of anti-colonial resistance and their counterparts in the metropoles. And that exchange has been going on forever. And it has made a slow but nevertheless radical progress.
Professor Alata seems rather pessimistic. Professor Alata seems rather pessimistic when it comes to the prospects of the academic leadership of these institutions pushing back. Do you have faith that there's a possibility of kind of overturning this project?
One of the things we have to remember is that the shock troops of colonialism were the companies. And the role of corporate capitalism in the universities, particularly in the United States, is extraordinary. I mean, they, at my university, for example, they control the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees has become, especially in the wake of Gaza, increasingly restive and increasingly forthcoming about their desire to remake the university in the image of business. That is to say that it should be profit-making, that it should promote capitalism actively, and that it should follow not the model of universities that we have grown up in, but the model of the capitalist firm. And the transformation they're trying to make is a response to a transformation that people, anti-colonial people, are making also. That is to say, the land back movements in Canada, in Latin America, and in Palestine. And those movements aren't just about getting your land back, although that's an important element. They also push people to think differently about land. And one of the main problems, and here my colleague and I have a lot of overlap, the problem is not just that people possess the land, but that they have forgotten what it is to learn, how we engage with the material environment around us, whether that is the natural world or the material world of production and distribution. That property is a form of colonization of the mind, and in economics, above all, it is the most important because it penetrates most intimately into daily life and into the consciousness of people who take for granted that there is a market, that people are rational actors in it, that we produce things. I mean, in a certain sense, the whole idea of the production of knowledge is that we're engaged in an industry. And that is not how we should think of ourselves. We are engaged in many ways in undoing that.
Perhaps it's foolhardy to expect change from these academic leaders because they've never been ahead. They've never been leaders in making change within their institutions. We know that it's always been students in the United States. If you look at, for example, the 1960s, young people, students, ordinary students, helped to transform these spaces. Do you see prospects for that in terms of decolonizing these academic institutions?
Oh,
from the students?
absolutely. I mean, there are always people, there are always individuals who occupy a given position and who will try to make a change and may have even some effects. But I think you're right. I mean, change grows out of the ground. It comes in many ways from people who have not yet been told what they should think. And I mean, for example, when I was young, I grew up reading Amilcar Cabral, Patrice Lumumba, all the African anti-colonial leaders, and of course later C.L.R. James, Aimé Césaire, and they were the people who shaped my mind. And it was only later that I learned that I was not supposed to like them. I was supposed to like Plato, or I was supposed to like Hegel, and those were the figures I had to identify as my intellectual formation. But it wasn't true. And it's not true for young people now, that they are learning in ways that their professors see imperfectly. And it's a good thing, because it means they see more, they read more widely, they are introduced to ideas that are more expansive in some way. So yes, I think it comes, rashly or not, Weber says somewhere that a political vocation entails the ability to have hope when even hope is gone. Yeah.
You're agreeing with me.
I am agreeing with you, very much.
Change can be at the individual level, and many individuals can be, there's so many of us, my generation, younger generation after me, and our students who are committed to decolonizing knowledge. But when I think of myself, when I was a young lecturer or a graduate student, compared to now, the institutions haven't changed much.
No.
Still very neo-colonial.
Professor Syed, how can we support local ways of knowing without replacing one dominant system with another or creating new hierarchies within academia?
I am less worried about creating new hierarchies and worrying about that. I think let's get the emancipation and liberation, and then we'll worry about this. I think one of the ways that is always put forward is a way of stopping any kind of transformation. One of the arguments that the colonizers used was to say, we have to continue with the colonial rule, because if we don't, we will become colonized ourselves. And so that just becomes a deferment problem.
But don't we have to think about both? We have to think about emancipation. We also have to think about the way in which we want to organize ourselves going forward.
But I would say to you, let's get the emancipation and then we can think about that. I mean, what I'm trying to say to you is that if you think too far in the future, it becomes a paralysis of doing anything. And I think that links to the problem you want to ask about the local knowledges. So if both Anne and Zoe has been saying is this, look, if you look at the experience of the universities, how they incorporated or how they were driven to incorporate things like, for example, in the North American universities, especially in the United States, why did departments of Black studies or African American studies appear? They didn't appear because of a gift from administrators. They appeared because they were part of a social movement. And then you had a situation where Princeton and Harvard would compete to have the best African American studies department. Similarly, women's studies. When women's studies were able to actually exert social force, they had women's studies department. Now, in nearly every single case, women's studies departments have been reduced or have often been incorporated. And it's been done at the same time as there's been an argument that universities are basically have become, the feminist argument has been won. So there's a kind of a recuperation of institutions which goes on. So the question about how to get through local knowledges and things like that is that we can't maintain the distinction between the production of knowledge and the production of social and political mobilizations that demand for that knowledge to be put into different places. And that, I think, is an ongoing process. And this is why I think the question about, let's not worry about hierarchies, I don't think that is particularly useful at this point in time, because you have to give me an example. In this planet, there must be at least 20,000 universities or more. I'm just picking out a figure, but from what I read somewhere. How many of them do you think are actually decolonized universities? Nearly all of those universities, for the most part, are working on a westernized pattern, and not just rhetorically. The entire pattern of a university, the division into PhDs, the division into disciplines, it emerges at a particular point in the mid-19th century, mainly in Germany, then it's exported and globalized. It's done at the time, at the height of European colonialism. And what do? They go and study the world, but they're not studying the world, they're shaping the world. Take the example that I often use, the difference between anthropology and sociology. We would not have one department called anthropology and one called sociology. The reason we do is because anthropology was the study of the primitive, which meant the non-Western. And the study of sociology was the study of the modern, which meant the European. And that inheritance flows through the organizational politics, and it flows through all of these things. So I think it's important that we see the production of knowledge as part of the process of social and political mobilization and cultural mobilization. This is why, the thing with Gramsci says about intellectual and moral reform, but it's part of a movement. And if you want to get those results, then you need to organize into those movements. And I think that's the real critical element here.
I want you to dream right now. I'm thinking about Robin D.G. Kelly's book, Freedom Dreams, right? And I want you to kind of imagine, what that decolonized university looks like. What does it look like to you?
I think this is so what does a decolonized university look like? Partly, I think it looks like what's already been said, that it's a university in which the production of knowledge is seen as, let's say, a public good rather than a profit maximization element. I think it's a university in which you have the possibility of a different organization of disciplinary categories. It's a university in which you are actually thinking about education as not a process of simply diploma factories, which is what universities have tried to become.
So not as a commodity.
Not as a commodity. Well, it's a different kind of commodification. I suppose it's not in a way that you're thinking about the universities as what the universities used to dream of themselves as being a contribution to the development of a culture, and a development of a culture which actually opens up those kind of questions. So universities ideally must become spaces of hope. And that's not going to happen if they are simply spaces of desperation, that people are forced by desperation to study one thing rather than another. So I think it's a reimagining, but you can't have a decolonized university independently of a decolonized culture, independently of a decolonized society. So these things have to go into hand in hand. You may have different sequencing, but I don't think you can imagine a decolonized university without a broader decolonized context.
Professor Norton, same question to you, in terms of imagining the decolonized university.
Well, I agree. It has to come in a decolonizing, anti-colonial world. I think that it would be a place, first of all, it would be a much simpler place. It wouldn't have fancy dorms or gyms with lavish swimming pools and things like that, because it won't have to appeal to students to spend a great deal of money. It should be open to those who want to come, those who want to learn. It should be wildly argumentative. That is to say, it should not be about teaching people to be orderly, to conform. It should be about allowing them to be intellectually daring. That if they are learning new things, they will have unruly, unsettled thoughts, and that is a very good thing. That is where you get intellectual energy. So I would expect a very wild, unsettled place with relatively light structures of governance, relatively few hierarchies, but also a great deal of internal ethics and respect. That is to say, people, if they are to do that effectively, if they are to have the kind of wild and fierce arguments they need to have, they have to be self-disciplined. They have to recognize that they must respect the person that they don't agree with. They should contest with that person, but they have to recognize their fundamental human and intellectual dignity. And so I would like to dream of that unruly place. I mean, the good thing about it is you do see elements of that in the university. This is where we all came from. We came from the unsettled places in a deeply colonized order.
Professor Mignolo, the same question to you. When you're imagining the decolonized space within the university
Decolonized
space,
I made a mistake of not asking, because the speakers are always toward the audience and not toward the people who. So I don't have good ears, and I have difficulties understanding. And I forgot to ask to put one of the speakers toward here. So you have, and I'm very far from you. So what is your question again?
No, I was wanting you to kind of imagine the decolonized university, and what does that look like to you?
Could you?
Yes. What would a decolonized university look like?
I don't think the university can be decolonized.
Yes. Yes.
Why?
Give it up, right?
Why? Because if you want a decolonial university, it's like you want to have the cake and eat it. So after saying that the university, the state cannot, the nation state cannot be decolonized, because you cannot have a decolonial nation state with all the kind of the problems that imply the nation state. So the same with the university, and the same decolonizing the church. There is a lot of kind of theology of liberation, what talking about decolonizing the church. And, well, so why? Why is because because those are kind of colonial institutions. So you have to do something else. So the question is to separate the university from education, and to separate the state from the nation, and to separate religion or spirituality from the church. Because what the church did, or the kind of institutional religion does or did, is colonize spirituality. So that is why a lot of indigenous people in the Americas are talking about liberating spirituality, because Christianity, in that case, that was colonized by Christianity, colonized spirituality. But I think it's given that we cannot get rid of the nation state next week, or the university, or the church, it's very important to do decolonial work at the university, at the state, and at the university, and the museum, to do decolonial work on all the kind of existing institution, but looking toward a kind of a different horizon of organization of the society we call a state, different horizon of education, different horizon of spirituality that is not being colonized or controlled by the institution. So that will be my approach to the things.
Well,
and for 30 years or more, 35 years, I mean, I have been doing that at Duke University and saying, and this is, I think, is a very important issue to say, that we have to recognize that institutions like a university or the nation state or the church can use us. Yeah. We have to know how to use them. Or we have another option. We we are obedient, and we want to be part of the university, and want to be part of the church, and want to be part of the museum. So it's not an obligation. Some people say that we were talking about, I mean, for me, decoloniality is an option. It's an option that appeared, it's a kind of ideology or horizon that was not there. That horizon was dominated mainly after the 19th century by conservatism, liberalism, and socialism, and then at the end of the 19th century emerged Zionism.
Professor Mignolo.
So decolonization was not in the horizon, so it's another option. And people said it cannot be an option, it has to be an imperative. But if I say that the coloniality is an imperative, I become imperial.
Professor Mignolo, it's
because
imperative.
I want to impose, I want to obligate everybody to kind of enroll to the coloniality. It's a very complicated issue that we are discussing at this point.
Well, Professor Mignolo, it's imperative that I end this conversation right now. I've run out of options. I can see the horizon, and the horizon tells me that this session has come to an end. But I'd like to thank all of us, all of you on stage. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. And thank the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super interesting. I thought you were super diplomatic about the civilizational erasure that the Trump administration says is coming to Europe. Yes, but I thought you were very diplomatic about it. Also, just quickly, great to hear a reference to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. It was 1978. Bob Marley was in Kenya. A friend of mine, bizarrely enough called Nawaz, went to the hotel and said to reception, "Which room is Mr. Marley staying in?" They said, "Oh, room 15. He knocked on Marley's door, and Marley said, "Come in, Nawaz." Marley had a Quran on the bed, and Nawaz said, "Are you Muslim?" He said, "No, but I want to know everything." Bob Marley was decolonizing himself before we even realized. Ladies and gentlemen, time for lunch. Please come back to all your different sessions, whichever ones you want to go to, at 3:25, and we'll start at 3:30. Thank you so much. Hey, how's it going? How's it going?